Hey guys, tonight we're heading back to a world where soap was a luxury, baths were a gamble, and the faint whiff of manure was just the smell of life itself. You're stepping into the Middle Ages, the era of bustling markets, smoky hearths, and streets where pigs and people shared the same cobblestones. Hygiene, as we think of it today, didn't quite exist. You'll find that the idea of being clean was less about scrubbing dirt away and more about staying morally pure, which is, frankly, bad news for your nose. You probably wouldn't survive the smell of a medieval summer festival. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're watching from somewhere quiet tonight, tell me where you are and what time it is in the comments below. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin your walk through a medieval town. Somewhere in England, maybe France, the year 1250 or so. The air is thick with the scent of wood smoke and tallow, the faint tang of horses, and the ever-present perfume of humanity. Cobblestones glisten with a slick mixture of rainwater and things best left unidentified. Yet to your surprise, life bustles with cheer. Children run barefoot through puddles, women gossip at market stalls, and men haul barrels of ale past the stone church tower. You pass a bathhouse, a rare sight, though not as uncommon as people think. It's a timber building with a painted sign of a steaming tub swinging gently in the wind. Inside, you can hear laughter and splashing. The medieval bathhouse wasn't exactly a spa. It was part social hub, part health measure, and occasionally part brothel. Hot water was a luxury, and heating it meant hauling endless buckets from the well and tending fires all day. That meant bathing was often communal, not scandalous, just practical. If you stepped inside, the heat would hit you like a wall. Wooden tubs lined the room, steam rising in ghostly columns toward the rafters. Patrons lounged in the water, chatting about politics, crops, and the latest gossip from the next village. Attendants might bring you wine, herbal sachets, or even a snack while you soaked. The smell of rosemary and sage sometimes filled the air, a small attempt to disguise the underlying damp musk of used bathwater. You might imagine medieval folk as perpetually filthy, but in truth many townsfolk bathed more often than the myths claim. In 13th century Paris there were dozens of public bathhouses. London had several too, though by the 15th century they'd earned a scandalous reputation and were slowly shut down. The church for a time didn't object to bathing, only to the temptation that sometimes came with it. As one medieval moralist sighed, "It is better to be unwashed than to be impure." You wander further, barefoot now, your feet picking up the textures of the age, grit, straw, and the occasional squelch that makes you wish for shoes. Most ordinary folk went barefoot, especially children. Leather shoes were expensive, and going without them wasn't considered odd. There's even a saying recorded in the 14th century, "Barefooted feet know not deceit." It was a kind of rustic virtue, proof you worked honestly and lived close to the earth. Still, some townsfolk made efforts to stay clean in their own ways. They washed their hands and faces daily, often with cold water from the well. They'd use sand or ash to scour the skin, or sometimes soap made from animal fat and lye, harsh stuff that left hands cracked and sore. In wealthier homes, perfumed soaps from Italy or Castile might appear soft, fragrant, and wildly expensive. The bathhouse wasn't the only place for washing. Rivers and communal wells served as public gathering spots for rinsing linens and even quick dips. You'd see women knee-deep in water, beating fabric with paddles, their laughter echoing off stone bridges. Yet not everyone trusted water. Many believed that bathing opened the pores and let in disease. The irony of washing to get sick wasn't lost on them. By the late Middle Ages, after waves of plague and miasma theory took hold, cleanliness became suspiciously risky. Historians still argue whether the decline of bathhouses came from religious conservatism or pure fear of contagion. The Black Death, after all, had reshaped every idea of health. If bad air carried death, then wet skin and steam were dangerous. So the once busy bathhouses fell silent, their steamy laughter replaced by locked doors and whispered memories of better-smelling days. Back in the street, a man splashes water from a wooden bucket onto the stones in front of his tavern. He's not cleaning for cleanliness, he's tamping down dust. When you live in a world of dirt roads and wood smoke, dust is your constant companion. The concept of spotless whiteness, of disinfected gleam, simply didn't exist. Dirt was natural, even comforting. That doesn't mean medieval folk didn't value hygiene, they just defined it differently. To them, being clean meant balanced. You had to keep your humors in check: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Too much bathing might throw the body off, cooling it too much or letting bad airs in. Moderation was key. Wash your hands, rinse your face, maybe soak on feast days, but don't overdo it. And yet, despite the grime, there was a strange beauty to it all. You can almost see the shimmer of sunlight through the bathhouse steam, the golden dust in the air as a woman shakes out a linen shirt, the gentle chatter of neighbors sharing gossip over buckets. It was a world that smelled of bread, sweat, and wood, and everyone shared in it equally. You cross the small bridge near the mill, the air growing fresher. A group of children wades in the shallows, their laughter pure and bright. They splash without worry, their skin glowing in the late sun. Hygiene here is not a routine, it's an event, a brief communion with the clean chill of the stream. Somewhere nearby, an old man fills his flask and mutters a prayer, half to God and half to the water spirit he still half believes in. By evening, the bathhouse closes. The fire dies, leaving only the scent of damp wood and rosemary behind. You realize something quietly profound. In a world without antiseptic soap or running water, cleanliness wasn't about removing the world from your skin, it was about finding balance with it. You wake the next morning to the faint toll of a church bell, its sound drifting lazily across the rooftops. The air is crisp, the kind that smells faintly of dew and wood smoke, and as you stretch beneath your rough wool blanket, you realize you're thirsty. In the medieval world, thirst wasn't something easily solved by turning a tap. There was no plumbing, no neat silver handle that made clear water gush on command. Water came from the earth itself, from wells, streams, and rain barrels, and each drop carried with it a story and a little bit of danger. You step outside, wooden door creaking, and make your way toward the town well. It sits at the crossroads, capped with a thatched canopy and surrounded by cobblestones slick with morning damp. A few women are already there, pulling up buckets with ropes that groan against the pulley. Their laughter mixes with the splash of water. You wait in line with your jug, taking in the rhythm of this small daily ritual. Clean water was a communal affair. Every morning people queued at the same well, not just for drinking but for washing, cooking, even brewing ale. In fact, most people preferred ale to water because water could kill you. It sounds dramatic, but it was true. Wells near cesspits or latrines often got contaminated. A heavy rain could wash filth from streets into the nearest stream. People noticed, of course, but they didn't always know why the water made them sick. They just said the air around it felt foul, or that God had sent a punishment. You lower your jug into the cool darkness of the well, the rope humming softly. When the bucket splashes below, you can almost smell the minerals, the faint metallic tang of the earth. You haul it up, arms trembling with effort, and take a cautious sip. It's surprisingly clean, the flavor of stone and moss with just a hint of mud. You'd count yourself lucky. Many medieval townsfolk weren't. In London, some wells were so foul that people simply stopped using them. Chroniclers in the 14th century wrote of wells, corrupted by filth and stinking beyond bearing. In Paris, the water carriers who trudged through the streets with barrels on their backs often dipped into the Seine, a river shared by fishermen, washerwomen, and waste dumpers alike. And yet people survived. They boiled, brewed, strained, and hoped. The human stomach, as it turns out, can adapt to almost anything when it has to. You follow one of the washerwomen toward the riverbank. There, a dozen others kneel by the water, scrubbing linens against smooth stones. The sound is rhythmic, slap, rinse, twist, a kind of domestic percussion. Some have sprinkled ashes or fine sand onto the fabric to scour it clean. The sun catches the spray as they work, turning it into a soft mist that glitters for a moment before sinking back into the murky current. But there's something almost philosophical about the relationship people had with water then. They respected it, feared it, even personified it. In every stream there might lurk a spirit, in every well a blessing or a curse. Many wells were consecrated by priests, their rims marked with crosses. Some had offerings, coins, ribbons, or flowers left by those who hoped for good health or safe childbirth. You can still imagine the shimmer of copper at the bottom of the well, each coin a silent wish for survival. And then, of course, there was rainwater. Every roof channeled it, every barrel caught it. People used rain for washing hair or clothes since it was soft and didn't leave residue. Sky water, they sometimes called it, but even that wasn't foolproof. Roofs leaked soot and bird droppings into the barrels, and in the heat of summer the stored water grew rank. Still, to medieval minds it felt pure because it came straight from heaven. You pause to look down the river, watching as a boy fills a pail beside a tethered horse. The horse snorts, sending ripples across the surface, and for a moment you notice how brown the water is, yet no one seems to mind. A baker dips his bucket next, using the same water to mix dough later that morning. You almost want to warn him, but this is their normal. To them, clean water is the kind that doesn't immediately smell of death. Historians still argue whether medieval people were truly indifferent to hygiene or just doing the best they could. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. They knew bad water could make them sick, they saw it happen often enough, but they didn't understand the invisible bacteria behind it. Instead, they framed it as a question of corruption. Water spoiled if it stood too long or if evil miasmas entered it. The solution? Keep it moving, keep it fresh, keep it blessed. As the day warms, you wander to the edge of town where a small bathhouse once stood. Now it's fallen into disrepair, the wood warped and mossy. A farmer passes by, wiping his brow, and says the well nearby went bad a few years ago. Smelled like eggs, he grumbles. Killed the chickens, he shrugs as though it's just another of nature's moods. You peer inside the dry well, it's only a few feet deep now, choked with debris and time. In wealthier manors, water management was a bit more advanced. Stone cisterns collected rain, and indoor basins allowed for limited washing. Some castles even had rudimentary plumbing, lead pipes carrying water from nearby springs to upper floors. The The famous White Tower in London, built by the Normans, had a system for flushing waste away with running water, but such luxuries were rare. Most people had to rely on their legs and their luck. You find yourself watching a monk at work near the monastery's garden. He's tending to a wooden aqueduct that channels water toward a row of herbs, sage, thyme, and lavender mostly. Monasteries were exceptions in the medieval landscape, places where cleanliness still had meaning. The monks bathed more regularly, washed their hands before meals, and kept their wells protected within cloister walls. Water to them was sacred, a symbol of purity, both physical and spiritual. When you see him pause to scoop a handful and bless himself, it feels like a tiny echo of an ancient wisdom that never really vanished. Later that evening, you return to the village well. The crowd has thinned and the setting sun paints the scene in shades of amber and smoke. A woman fills her last bucket and says quietly that the water's been tasting odd lately. Her neighbor nods knowingly. Maybe a dead rat fell in. Maybe the gods are displeased. They'll talk about it for days, and eventually someone will call the local priest to bless the well again, sprinkle holy water on water, a ritual both poetic and absurd. You think about how different it is from your own world, where the idea of drinking water from a river seems insane. Yet somehow medieval people found beauty in the ordinary. Wells were meeting places, gossip hubs, courtship spots. Many love stories began with two people reaching for the same rope. Even the act of carrying water became part of life's rhythm, an everyday pilgrimage for survival. By the time darkness falls, the well stands silent. The bucket sways gently in the night breeze, and the last traces of sunlight fade from the water's surface. You realize that for all its risks, water was still the most precious thing they had, a daily reminder that life flowed, whether clean or not. And somewhere far off, another bell rings, soft, echoing, as if to mark the hour when the town settles back into its ancient heartbeat, trusting that tomorrow the wells will still hold enough to fill another day. You wake to the sound of fabric flapping in the morning breeze. From every window, line, and lowhead, sheets and shirts sway like pale flags of surrender. Laundry day in a medieval town is no small affair. It's half chore, half battle against grime, sweat, and the tiny armies that live in every seam. Clothing, after all, was more than fashion back then. It was armor against weather, status made visible, and for most people, a second skin they rarely took off. The word linen itself came to mean cleanliness. When someone in the Middle Ages said they were clean, they often meant they'd changed into a fresh linen shirt, not that they'd bathed. You step into a small courtyard where a group of women kneel beside wooden tubs, scrubbing linen with lye and ashes. Their hands are raw and red from the caustic mix, yet they hum softly as they work. Soap, when available, was made from rendered animal fat boiled with ash. It had a sharp, smoky scent, and though it cut through grease well enough, it also stripped the skin bare. For those who couldn't afford soap, urine, yes, urine, was a common substitute. Collected in jugs and left to ferment, it produced ammonia strong enough to whiten fabric. It's not glamorous, but it worked. Clothing wasn't washed every day, or even every week. Outer garments like wool tunics or dresses were expensive and difficult to clean, so people relied on the layer closest to the skin, their linen underclothes, to absorb sweat and oils. Linen, being smoother and cooler, could be washed more easily. You might change that shirt once or twice a week, maybe more if you were noble or fortunate. The poor, however, wore the same garments until they nearly walked off on their own. You run your hand along one of the drying sheets. It's coarse but soft from years of use. Linen was prized because it could be boiled, beaten, and bleached by sunlight. And sunlight, the ultimate medieval disinfectant, was the secret weapon. People didn't understand bacteria, but they knew that hanging your clothes in the sun kept them sweet. Still, for all that effort, one enemy refused to leave: lice. Everyone had them. Kings, peasants, monks, queens, no one was spared. Lice thrived in the seams of clothing and hair, even in the folds of bedding. You scratch your own scalp at the thought. It's almost comforting to imagine that medieval people didn't see lice as shameful. They were simply a part of life. Monks had special combs for catching them. Lovers picked them off each other's hair as a gesture of intimacy. Some even joked about them, calling them the little gray ones that whisper at night. Historians still argue whether certain herbs or oils actually help keep lice away. Medieval texts recommend everything from wormwood and pennyroyal to garlic and vinegar. You can imagine someone sitting by the hearth, rubbing a concoction into their scalp that smelled more like a salad than a remedy. There are even accounts of noblewomen sprinkling their hair with powdered lavender or orris root to both perfume themselves and, hopefully, discourage infestations. Inside a cottage, a mother examines her daughter's hair under the window light. With practiced patience, she parts the strands, squinting for movement. Her fingernails are quick and sure, the method hasn't changed in centuries. When she finds one, she crushes it between her nails with a soft pop. Then she sighs, smiles faintly, and keeps going. Hygiene here is not about being spotless, it's about maintenance. A quiet battle fought daily, never truly won. Your eye catches a noble passing by in the lane, his cloak trimmed with fur and lined with fine silk. Surely you think wealth must have freed him from such pests. But no, even the grandest robes couldn't keep lice out. In fact, the warmth of fur made it worse. In royal wardrobes, servants were employed just to brush, beat, and fumigate clothing. They hung garments over fires, burned aromatic herbs beneath them, and shook them vigorously to dislodge the tiny hitchhickers. The queen's chamberlain, for instance, might prepare her gowns by laying them over steaming basins filled with juniper or rosemary. The rising vapor was believed to cleanse both the fabric and the spirit. It was, in a sense, medieval dry cleaning. You wander into a tailor's shop next, or rather, a narrow room that smells of wool, oil, and iron. The tailor works by the light of a single window, his shears gleaming like small swords. Every stitch is deliberate. Clothes are precious, not something you buy, but something you own, repair, and pass down. For poorer folk, garments are patched until the fabric itself gives up. Even nobles recut old robes to fit new fashions. And cleanliness wasn't just about appearance, it was moral. To wear stained or tattered clothes was to risk judgment. Preachers thundered about the sin of sloth, reminding congregations that the body should be clad as the soul is adorned. A clean shirt might be your only defense against gossip. There's a famous 14th century saying, "A man is known by his linen." That linen was also your bedfellow. Bedsheets were washed about as often as underclothes, every few weeks if possible, sometimes far less. You can picture it now, a straw mattress, a wool blanket, and a single sheet beneath you. The straw gets replaced once or twice a year, maybe sprinkled with herbs to ward off pests. Sweet flag and lavender were favorites, and yet when you wake scratching, you realize the herbs aren't quite enough. By midday, the washerwomen have hung the last of the laundry. The courtyard smells of soap, smoke, and sun-warmed cloth. One woman wipes her brow and mutters that her husband will ruin the shirt again by nightfall. Men sweat like horses, she laughs, and think it makes them noble. You smile, the humor is timeless. A few boys run past, their tunics hitched high, bare legs streaked with mud. Clothes were simpler for children, short, practical, and easy to scrub. Most were made of homespun wool or linen. Dyes faded quickly, so the world wasn't as colorful as the tapestries suggest. Everything was a shade of brown, gray, or faded blue. Only the rich could afford the bright hues made from imported plants or crushed insects. Imagine a crimson gown shimmering in a crowd of drab tunics, a living signal of wealth and, ironically, of people who likely bathed the least. In the evening, as the sun sinks, you pass a family gathered around a small hearth. They're sewing by candlelight, repairing a sleeve, a hem, a torn cuff. Every stitch is a quiet act of care. The mother pulls the thread through her teeth to dampen it, then runs it through the fabric with smooth precision. The father turns his boots by the fire, trying to soften the hardened leather. He sniffs one, grimaces, and mutters that maybe tomorrow he'll wash his feet in the river, maybe. As you watch, you start to understand the strange rhythm of medieval cleanliness. It isn't about removing every trace of dirt. It's about maintaining dignity amid dust. They knew the scent of earth and sweat was inescapable, so they worked around it with linen, herbs, and sunlight. And maybe there's something poetic about it. You look up at the clothes fluttering overhead, hundreds of shirts and sheets swaying gently like the sails of ghostly ships. In the fading light, they look almost holy. Each one tells a story of someone's labor, someone's warmth, someone's life. When the wind dies, the cloth settles quietly against the line, and for a moment the town feels clean, not sterile, not spotless, but alive. You wake with the faint taste of smoke and stale ale on your tongue, the flavor of a medieval morning. The air in your little chamber feels thick, the hearth long gone cold, and the only water nearby sits in a cracked earthen jug by the bed. You tilt it toward your lips, and the first sip reminds you that fresh water is relative. Still, it's better than the alternative, medieval morning breath. Oral hygiene, as we think of it today, toothbrushes, minty paste, regular dentist visits didn't quite exist, but that doesn't mean people didn't care about their teeth. They did. In fact, they often smiled proudly, showing off surprisingly decent teeth by pre-modern standards. Most didn't consume refined sugar until later centuries, and that made a difference. But the ways they tried to keep their mouths clean, well, they were creative. You reach for the little pot of tooth powder sitting on the wooden shelf by the bed. It's homemade, a gritty mix of crushed herbs, burnt salt, and a dash of charcoal. A common medieval recipe might include sage, salt, and powdered oyster shells. Some added ashes from burnt rosemary, others ground pumice or even powdered bone. The idea was simple: scrub, scrape, and hope for the best. You dip your damp fingertip into the mixture and begin rubbing it over your teeth. The texture is coarse like sand, and the taste, smoky, herbal, faintly metallic, makes you wince. Still, after a few moments, your mouth feels fresher, your tongue less coated. You rinse with a mouthful of ale, since no one wastes clean water on spitting. The faint sweetness lingers, and for a moment you actually feel human again. Medieval people didn't just use tooth powders. They chewed twigs, often from hazel, birch, or mallow, fraying one end to create a kind of natural brush. A traveler's diary from the 14th century even mentions chewing sticks of sweet wood to cleanse the mouth. If you were wealthy, you might import cinnamon bark or cloves, which not only freshened the breath but masked more unpleasant realities. In cities where the air reeked of smoke, waste, and humanity, masking odor was a full-time job. People carried pomanders, little metal orbs filled with fragrant herbs and resins. Some even chewed on anise seeds or cardamom between meals. The rich had the luxury of imported spices, while the poor made do with parsley or mint from the garden. You head outside, passing the baker's stall. The smell of bread mingles with the tang of yeast and wood ash. He smiles, showing surprisingly sturdy teeth, though a few are darkened near the gum. That was normal. Tooth decay happened, but not to everyone. The real dental disasters came later, after sugar invaded Europe through trade and conquest. For now, most mouths were safe, at least until old age or infection set in. And when infection did set in, well, that's when things got interesting. Toothaches were considered one of life's great torments. The pain could drive even the most stoic monk to tears. Lacking dentists, people turned to folk remedies. You might hold a clove between your teeth or apply a poultice of crushed herbs mixed with vinegar. A priest might bless your jaw with holy water or a relic. There are even records of people wearing charms inscribed with Latin prayers, believing it would drive out the tooth worm. Yes, the tooth worm. Medieval medical texts claimed that decay was caused by tiny worms burrowing into the tooth. It sounds ridiculous now, but it made perfect sense to them. When you have no microscope and your tooth suddenly starts throbbing with invisible pain, imagining a living thing inside it isn't that far-fetched. One 15th century physician even suggested holding a candle near the tooth to lure the worm out. For the record, it didn't work, but it certainly distracted you. If the pain became unbearable, you could always visit the barber surgeon. These men cut hair, drew blood, and when necessary, pulled teeth. The tools of the trade were simple: iron pincers, tongs, or sometimes a small screw-like device called a tooth key. No anesthetic, of course. You simply gritted your teeth, the ones you still had, and hoped the man had a steady hand. You can almost hear it, the cry of pain, the sudden silence, the relieved laughter afterward. The barber wipes his hands on a rag and tosses the bloody tooth aside. "You'll sleep better tonight," he says. You nod, but you're not sure if you believe him. For daily maintenance, people tried gentler methods. After meals, it was common to rinse the mouth with wine or vinegar. Some chewed fennel seeds or dried orange peel. A 14th century manuscript recommends rubbing the gums with honey and salt to make them firm and red. And monks, ever practical, kept mint, sage, and hyssop growing in their herb gardens for that very reason. You stop by a monastery garden to see for yourself. The air smells sweet, full of crushed leaves and earth. A young monk, sleeves rolled, is grinding something with a pestle. "Powder for the mouth," he explains with a faint smile. "To guard against the humors that breed foulness." He offers you a pinch. It smells sharp and clean, sage and salt again with a touch of mint. You thank him and continue walking, tongue tingling faintly. Despite these efforts, the average mouth wasn't exactly minty. Chronic halitosis, bad breath, was common. People blamed it on hot foods, rotten humors, or poor digestion. Doctors prescribed balanced diets and gentle purges, believing that breath reflected the state of the stomach and soul alike. "A foul mouth reveals foul humors," one medieval physician warned. "As above, so below." In courts and feasts, bad breath could be a social weapon. Chroniclers whispered about lords whose breath might fell a horse. Servants were sometimes ordered to prepare bowls of rosewater or wine for nobles to rinse between courses. A well-bred lady might carry a pomander at her belt, ready to raise it discreetly whenever conversation turned pungent. You picture it now, a candlelit banquet hall, laughter echoing off the walls, roasted meats steaming on silver platters. A minstrel plucks a lute. A nobleman leans too close to his companion, his words sweet but his breath not. She smiles politely and fans herself. Across the room, someone discreetly passes sprigs of mint like a secret code of courtesy. Historians still argue whether medieval people truly cared about bad breath or simply accepted it. Surviving texts show genuine concern, not out of vanity but out of etiquette. To smell pleasant was to show respect. Cleanliness, even in the smallest acts, reflected one's moral worth. A pure mouth meant a pure soul. By evening, as you walk back through the darkening streets, the smell of cooking fires fills the air: meat, onions, ale. People laugh, eat, sing. Somewhere a woman is brushing her teeth with burnt bread crusts. Somewhere else a monk is whispering a prayer to St. Apollonia, the patron saint of toothaches. And you strangely feel grateful for your modern toothbrush, that humble bit of plastic and bristle standing on your bathroom counter, waiting to save you from all of this. But as you pause at the edge of the river and look down at your reflection, the twilight shimmering on the water, you realize that even in their rough, smoky way, medieval people were trying. They scrubbed, they chewed, they prayed, and they smiled. Their breath may have been questionable, but their humanity shone through just fine. You step through the crooked wooden doorway of a low, steaming building at the edge of town, the bathhouse. From outside, it looks humble, timber beams, wattle walls, and smoke curling lazily through holes in the roof. But inside, the air is heavy with heat, laughter, and the scent of rosemary and wood ash. Bathhouses were the great equalizers of medieval life. Peasants, merchants, and nobles alike gathered in these steamy chambers, shedding not only dirt but also formality. They were places to wash, to gossip, to make deals, even to flirt. You can feel it as soon as you step in, the mingled murmur of voices, the splash of buckets, the soft slosh of water poured over bare shoulders. Cleanliness wasn't constant, but it wasn't rare either. Contrary to the myth of a filthy Middle Ages, many people washed more often than you'd expect. Full baths might be weekly or monthly depending on season and wealth, but hands and faces were rinsed daily. And those who could afford it, city dwellers especially, visited the public baths regularly, sometimes as part of ritual purity, sometimes simply for pleasure. You find yourself guided to a small bench by a cheerful attendant. He brings a rough linen towel, a bar of grayish soap, and a bucket of steaming water. The soap is made from animal fat and lies sharp on the skin but effective. Some even mixed in herbs, thyme for scent, rosemary for cleansing, mint for freshness. You dip a corner of the towel into the bucket, squeeze it out, and begin wiping away the dust of the road. The sensation is wonderful. The heat seeps into your bones, the stiffness leaving your neck and shoulders. Around you, the room hums with life, an old man humming a tune as he scrubs, two merchants arguing about the price of wool, a group of women laughing softly behind a screen. Bathing, you realize, was a social act. In some towns, bathhouses were divided by gender or by time of day, men in the morning, women in the evening. But in others, mixed bathing wasn't unusual, especially in the earlier Middle Ages. Chronicles mention couples bathing together, families sharing tubs, and attendants serving food and wine as people lounged half-submerged in the steaming pools. It was relaxation, medieval style. Of course, not everyone approved. The church frowned upon excessive bathing, worrying that pleasure and temptation lingered too close to sin. A 13th-century preacher warned that those who bathed too often cleanse not the soul but tempt the flesh. Still, even monks had to wash. Monastic rules often allowed for baths on feast days or when illness struck, though they preferred cold water and humility to scented soaps and chatter. You glance toward the corner where a wooden tub sits beneath a dripping spout. An attendant pours water from a great cauldron, adjusting its temperature by adding ladles of cold from a nearby bucket. Medieval heating was an art too little, and the water turned frigid too much, and it scalded. The steam curls upward, fragrant with herbs. It's not just for smell, certain plants were believed to cleanse the spirit and protect against disease. Sage, lavender, rue all had their place. You sink into the tub. The heat shocks you at first, then soothes. You close your eyes and let your thoughts drift. The sound of dripping water blends with distant voices, a woman telling a story about a ghost in the marshes, a child giggling as her mother washes her hair with ash and vinegar. Hair washing was an event of its own. Without shampoo, people relied on herbal rinses, infusions of nettle, rosemary, or chamomile. Vinegar or stale beer might be added to cut through grease, leaving hair surprisingly shiny. Combs were carved from bone or wood, often decorated with little crosses or charms to ward off lice. Afterward, hair was dried by the fire, brushed, and sometimes perfumed with a little oil or powder. Clean skin was also treated with care. Wealthy bathers might apply ointments made from rose oil, honey, or almond milk. Poorer folk used what they had, sometimes just fat or ashes. In the Roman tradition, many bathhouses even included massage rooms, where attendants rubbed the skin with oils before scraping it clean with metal tools called strigils. Though the Roman Empire had long fallen, its bathing culture lived on, reshaped by medieval hands. The bathhouse itself was a curious mixture of worlds, half practical, half luxurious. In one corner, merchants discussed trade routes and cargoes. In another, midwives shared gossip about births and betrothals. Somewhere, a friar might be lecturing a sinner, or two lovers exchanging shy glances behind a veil of steam. But bathing was not just about vanity. In an age when illness was often blamed on imbalance of the humors, black bile, yellow bile, blood, and phlegm, bathing was seen as a way to restore health. Hot water was thought to draw out impurities, to open the pores and release bad humors. Physicians even prescribed specific baths: sulfur springs for joint pain, cold immersion for melancholy, herbal soaks for fever. You think about that as the water laps against your arms. Maybe they weren't so wrong. The warmth does make you feel lighter, calmer, as though the weight of the medieval world is briefly washed away. Not every bathhouse was so tranquil, though. In cities like Paris or London, they could be noisy, crowded, and rowdy. Some were honest businesses, others thinly disguised brothels. Stew houses, they were called, from the old French estuve, meaning heated room. By the late Middle Ages, moral reformers were calling for their closure, claiming they encouraged sin. but even then, the pull of warm water and human company was hard to resist. As the evening deepens, you leave the bathhouse, your skin tingling in the cool air. The street outside is quiet, the moon reflected in puddles. You feel lighter, cleaner, though your clothes, still faintly dusty, remind you that cleanliness was fleeting in this world. Tomorrow, the work, the dirt, the sweat will return, but tonight you feel renewed. And as you walk back to your lodgings, the faint scent of rosemary clinging to your hair, you realize how much these people understood the simple pleasure of water, how it calmed, healed, and connected. The medieval world was often rough and grimy, yes, but beneath the grime there was a yearning for purity, not just of body but of soul. You can almost hear the water still, dripping, echoing, whispering through time. You step out into the winding streets of the medieval town as the sun warms the cobblestones, and almost immediately the air hits you. It's not offensive exactly if you're expecting modern sanitation, but it's alive in a way that makes you acutely aware of every human, animal, and waste odor mingling together. People pass, women carrying baskets of vegetables, men hauling firewood, children barefoot and laughing. And yet, each person is carrying something else too, the invisible cloak of medieval scents, carefully managed to hide what the world insisted you couldn't avoid. Perfume was both an art and a necessity. The very idea of masking the natural smell of the human body wasn't vanity, it was survival. Some relied on simple herbs, rosemary, sage, lavender, mint. Others used vinegar infused with fragrant plants to rinse hands or wipe the face. Wealthier individuals could afford imported oils, rose, amber, musk, or even costly adders distilled from flowers and spices brought along trade routes stretching across Europe and the Middle East. You catch a whiff of a merchant's stall, jars of dried herbs, small bottles of oils, pouches of frankincense and myrrh. He gestures for you to sniff a vial of rosemary water. The scent is sharp, almost electric, and for a moment it feels like standing in a sunlit garden rather than the gritty town square. Herbs were not merely for fragrance, they were believed to protect against disease. A pinch of thyme or basil, tucked into your sleeves or hat, was thought to guard against miasmas, the invisible bad airs blamed for plague, fever, and general misfortune. Herbal sachets were common. You'd find them tucked into clothing, sewn into pillows, or hung from ceilings. People rubbed the herbs between their fingers and inhaled, hoping the fragrance would ward off both sickness and social embarrassment. In some households, lavender boughs dangled from doorways, mint leaves littered the hearth, and rosemary wreaths adorned tables. The scent of herbs was layered, a careful choreography designed to counteract the smell of sweat, smoke, and excrement. Yet not every method was subtle. Pomanders, small metal spheres filled with herbs and resins, were carried by nobles, sometimes dangling from chains around the neck. These could be pressed to the face during dinners or public gatherings, effectively giving the wearer a small bubble of personal fragrance in a world otherwise dense with odors. You might have seen one swinging gently at a courtly gathering. It sent a bold proclamation: I am refined, I am clean, and I demand respect. Even commoners engaged in similar, if more rudimentary, practices. Vinegar soaked with herbs was rubbed on hands and faces. Smoke from burning rosemary or juniper was used to fumigate rooms, wards against both insects and disease. Medieval people didn't just mask smells, they ritualized them, turning scent into both protection and subtle display of social status. You notice a street vendor grinding flowers into a paste, mixing rose petals with honey. It's for perfume, yes, but also for medicinal purposes. Certain scents were believed to cure headaches, calm nerves, or drive away the devil himself. You can imagine a mother rubbing a tiny dab on her child's wrists, whispering a prayer under her breath, hoping the fragrance carries both protection and comfort. And yet, for all these efforts, smell was never fully conquered. Even the wealthiest homes could not escape the odors of the town outside. Smoke from hearths, the clatter of animals, the ever-present tang of waste in alleyways, it all seeped in. That's where the art of layering scents came in. Lavender in one room, sage in another, sweet-smelling powders sprinkled across floors. The smell was a constant negotiation, a dialogue between the natural world and human ingenuity. You pass a group of noblewomen walking toward the cathedral. Their gowns are heavy, their hair adorned with ribbons, and each carries a small sachet, a perfumed shield against the mundane world. Historians still argue whether these perfumes were primarily about masking odor or signaling status, perhaps both. A scent could announce wealth, refinement, or even marital availability, a silent social code woven into every step. Not all scents were pleasant, even intentionally. Some perfumes contained ingredients we'd find bizarre today. Ambergris, musk, civet, and even human hair were common in high-end concoctions. People believed these materials concentrated potency, whether for healing or attraction. Fringe recipes recommended blending powdered pearls or crushed coral into pomades, luxurious, expensive, and undeniably exotic. The very oddity of the materials made the fragrance an unmistakable signal of wealth and taste. In monasteries, scent had spiritual purpose. Incense burned in chapels was both aromatic and symbolic, intended to purify the air and elevate the spirit. Monks carried sprigs of rosemary or lavender while working in the garden, believing the fragrance kept not just the body but the soul in balance. Even the simple act of brewing herbal teas or tinctures contributed to a landscape alive with subtle, soothing odors. You stop at a corner where a small apothecary has set out jars of powdered herbs, oils, and balms. The air here is heavy, almost intoxicating, a mixture of dried flowers, vinegar, and resin. You inhale and it feels like stepping into a different world, one where smell is a tool, a shield, a pleasure, and a language all at once. People walked, worked, and socialized in this olfactory landscape, navigating both practical necessity and aesthetic desire. And yet the art of hiding smell was sometimes humorous. Chroniclers note stories of noblemen sniffing vigorously to hide the stench of unwashed hair, or peasants sprinkling ground herbs over shoes and feet to stave off complaints from neighbors. Even the rich could not escape the faint, inevitable realities of the human body, so they invented rituals, concoctions, and clever strategies to manage it. As the evening draws in, the town streets soften in color and tone. Smoke curls from chimneys mingling with the faint sweetness of flowers and crushed herbs. You realize that scent was more than hygiene. It was culture, it was etiquette, it was protection, and occasionally it was play. And as you breathe deeply, inhaling hints of rosemary, sage, and earth, you feel the medieval world around you, alive, aromatic, and vibrantly human. You step out into the cool morning air, the scent of smoke and wood mingling with the faint tang of the market, and you remember one thing: in medieval towns, waste was never far away. Streets were lined with refuse, animals wandered freely, and the conveniences we take for granted simply didn't exist. Every household, from the humblest peasant cottage to the grandest manor, had its own strategies for dealing with the inevitable, some clever, some utterly horrifying. Let's start with the humble chamber pot. Almost everyone had one tucked beneath a bed or a bench. It was ceramic or metal, sometimes elaborately decorated for wealthier folk, and it was emptied at the nearest cesspit or street gutter. In city streets, the warning cry of "Gardes Ello," or "Look out below," was common when a resident dumped their nightly collection onto the cobbles below. You dodge instinctively, feeling grateful for your modern plumbing. Chamber pots were only part of the story. Privies, the medieval toilets proper, were often simple wooden boxes built over pits or streams. Castles in particular had ingenious designs. Guardrobes projecting from the walls like tiny balconies allowed waste to drop directly into the moat or ditch below. Some of these even had rudimentary wooden seats, though comfort was far from the priority. Privacy, too, was a luxury. In crowded urban homes, multiple families shared facilities, meaning everyone negotiated timing, hygiene, and, occasionally, dignity. You wander past a castle wall and peek at a guardrobe. Its narrow chilly and smells faintly of centuries-old ammonia. Despite the stench, these setups were surprisingly effective at removing waste from living quarters, at least compared to the open streets where pigs, dogs, and humans all did their business in shared spaces. That said, runoff often ended up in rivers used for drinking and washing, so medieval water management was a careful balance between convenience and risk. Some families took more creative measures. Pails and buckets were lined with straw or moss to absorb odors, herbs might be sprinkled on top, and ashes were often added to neutralize smell. You can imagine a mother tipping a bucket over the garden fence, muttering prayers under her breath, hoping the neighbors don't notice. Urban laws even dictated when waste could be dumped into the streets, though enforcement was inconsistent. Nighttime was safest, and so the city streets at dawn often bore a potent bouquet of yesterday's offerings. In wealthier households, attendants often managed sanitation carefully. They emptied pots, cleaned privies, and sometimes carried scented herbs to mask the smell. Medieval hygiene manuals for the elite included instructions for washing latrines with vinegar, sand, or water, and lining them with fragrant materials. Even so, everyone knew that living close to waste meant exposure to disease. Pigs and dogs scavenging in alleyways were not only nuisances but vectors of illness, carrying off scraps and distributing filth in equal measure. Historians still argue whether medieval urban sanitation was catastrophic or just pragmatic. It's clear that the people of the time were highly aware of smells, filth, and contamination, even if they didn't understand germs. They developed rituals and strategies, often involving a combination of disposal, masking, and personal protection. Peppermint, sage, rosemary, and lavender were sprinkled liberally, but so was humor. Chroniclers often joked about neighbors' chamber pots or the unpredictable flight of street waste. You pass a row of cottages where buckets line the edges of doorways. A child scampers past, carrying a small tin pot to the street. He's careful, alert to the cries of passers-by, aware that failure could mean punishment or at least ridicule. Women sweep doorsteps, scattering sand to absorb the smell and make walking safer. The whole neighborhood functions like a rhythm, each resident aware of the steps needed to coexist with waste in tight quarters. Even monastic life was not exempt. Monks and nuns had latrines, often built along walls with sloped gutters. They washed their hands carefully afterward, following the strict rules of hygiene in cloisters. Certain texts emphasize washing with cold water, sometimes with added herbs or vinegar. After all, even in a religious environment, the consequences of poor sanitation could be devastating. No one wanted disease in their cells. Sometimes waste management was downright bizarre. You read accounts of privy gardens, where the pit below the latrine was used to fertilize herbs or vegetables. Human waste became a resource, valuable for its nitrogen content, though handling it required fortitude. Fertilizing fields this way connected daily hygiene directly to survival and agriculture, a loop of life and decay that the modern mind finds both fascinating and faintly horrifying. You glance toward a narrow alley and see a scavenger cart moving through. The scavenger collects trash, manure, and sometimes even ashes from hearths. It's not glamorous work, but it's essential. Medieval towns depended on a complex, often invisible network of labor to manage filth. Without these people, streets would become impassable, disease would surge, and the town itself might collapse. By late afternoon, the streets are quieter. Chamber pots are emptied discreetly, privies cleaned, and herbs sprinkled across thresholds. People step gingerly across cobblestones, avoiding the occasional splash or residue. The air, though still heavy with human presence, carries hints of sage and rosemary, mingled with smoke and sun-warmed stone. Walking past the tavern, you note the smell of ale mingling with the town's odors. It's almost pleasant in comparison, a reminder that scent, like hygiene, is relative. Medieval people developed an entire sensory system for navigating filth, smell, sight, touch, and ritual all working together. What seems unbearable to us was ordinary to them, managed through ingenuity, humor, and herbal magic. You pause at the bridge overlooking the river, which carries away some of the town's waste, filtered through stone and current. You notice the ducks paddling in the murky water, indifferent to human odor. The cycle continues, ancient and unbroken, disposal masking reuse survival. And as you breathe in the mingled sense of town and river, you understand a deeper truth. Hygiene in the Middle Ages was not about perfection, but adaptation, cleverness, and communal effort. You run your fingers through your hair and shudder, imagining what medieval heads must have endured. Hair in the Middle Ages was more than decoration. It was a sign of status, virtue, and even morality. Nobles wore elaborate braids and veils, while peasants kept theirs practical, tied back with cords or left loose under hoods. But no matter rank, one enemy lurked invisibly: lice. Everyone had them, there was no escaping it. From king to commoner, lice thrived in the damp, warm folds of clothing and the nooks of hair. They were so ubiquitous that many chroniclers barely mentioned them, assuming readers already understood the inevitability. You can imagine a medieval morning, women combing hair meticulously, children scratching, men grumbling, all while the tiny gray invaders crawled undisturbed. Combing was both grooming and warfare. Combs were carved from bone, wood, or ivory, often ornately decorated. Some had fine teeth, others coarse, designed to catch lice and nits. In monasteries, monks carried specialized combs for themselves and visitors, ridding heads of pests in what must have been a ritualized, silent struggle. Wealthier folk employed attendants or children to help, carefully parting hair, inspecting for movement, and crushing lice between nails. You notice the persistent smell of herbs in the air. Rosemary, lavender, pennyroyal, and rue were often crushed and rubbed into hair, not just for fragrance but as repellents. You sprinkle a pinch of one such herb into your hand and rub it through your imagined locks. It's sharp, aromatic, faintly medicinal, the medieval solution to a persistent problem. Some even recommended infusing vinegar with herbs, rinsing hair in it to discourage lice. Fringe remedies included bathing heads in beer or wine, effective, perhaps a little, mostly intoxicating. You peek into a courtyard where a group of children are playing. A mother kneels beside one, parting hair to check the scalp. She hums softly, a protective melody, as she removes a stubborn nit. There's no shame here, only routine. Lice were considered as normal as dirt or sweat. Chroniclers note that smallpox, plague, and lice often traveled together, a combined reminder that cleanliness was relative. Men approached grooming differently. Short hair made lice easier to manage, but long styles were sometimes unavoidable for fashion or status. Aristocrats wore wigs or hairpieces, which ironically could harbor their own infestations if not cared for. Hair was washed with herbs, sometimes boiled in water or milk. Wealthy women might massage scalp with scented oils, almond, rose, or even saffron, both for health and allure. Bathing the scalp was sporadic. Medieval hygiene manuals suggest washing once or twice a week, sometimes less. The water itself could be infested, so rinses were supplemented with herbs, vinegar, or ash. You can picture the smoky, fragrant scent wafting from a kitchen as hair was scrubbed and combed, a subtle perfume masking not just daily odors but a microcosm of insects. Historians still argue whether lice were primarily a health concern or merely a social nuisance. Some believed infestation signaled moral failing, others understood it as unavoidable. Remedies ranged from practical to bizarre. Fumigation with smoke, oiling hair, rubbing in sulfur, or even wearing small amulets to ward off infestation. You imagine a noblewoman staring solemnly at her reflection, comb in hand, while a tiny silver charm dangles from her braid. protecting both vanity and virtue. You wander past a monastery garden where novice monks are collecting herbs for medicinal use. Pennyroyal, sage, and rosemary are bundled in small cloths, destined to become powders, teas, and scalp treatments. Even the humble layperson could follow their lead. Herbs crushed and rubbed into hair, hats or kerchiefs worn to limit exposure, and frequent combing, a ritual both preventive and symbolic. In the streets, barbers offered another solution. Barber surgeons sometimes specialized in hair treatments, including lice removal. For a fee, they would comb, oil, or even shave the affected area. Some used hot tongs to burn lice, painful, dramatic, and occasionally effective. Fringe remedies included applying mixtures of crushed herbs, ashes, and fats, some pleasant, others foul. You can picture the little gray specks vanishing in the smoke and steam of these barbering rituals. Children were especially prone to infestation. Schools, crowded homes, and playgrounds made lice spread inevitable. Mothers and older siblings combed meticulously, sometimes singing to soothe fussy children. You can hear the scratch, the gentle pull of combed teeth, the soft murmur of familial patience. There's a rhythm to it, the same rhythm repeated across towns, villages, and estates, a quiet testament to human persistence. Hair hygiene was intertwined with social ritual. Clean, brushed hair signaled respectability. Matted, unkempt locks could invite gossip or disdain. At feasts and gatherings, hair was perfumed, braided, and adorned. Comb techniques passed from mother to daughter, from apprentice to servant, preserving knowledge not only of style but of survival. By evening, the air is rich with the scent of herbs and smoke. You watch women hanging lavender and rosemary sprigs to dry, boys brushing hair before supper, and monks folding fragrant herbs into neat bundles. The fight against lice is ongoing, mundane, yet somehow dignified. You realize that hygiene was never about perfection, but about strategy, ritual, and small, persistent victories. And as you step into the quiet streets, running your fingers through imagined, herb-scented hair, you understand. Medieval grooming was an art of life itself, a negotiation with nature, and a testament to the ingenuity of people navigating a world alive with insects, odor, and the relentless pursuit of human decency. You wander into a dimly lit apothecary, the air thick with the pungent mix of dried herbs, animal fat, and minerals. Shelves groan under jars of powders, tinctures, and unidentifiable liquids, while the faint scent of vinegar cuts through it all. This is the crossroads of medieval hygiene and medicine, where survival, superstition, and experimentation collide. Medieval medical theory was dominated by the humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health was a careful balance of these bodily fluids, and personal cleanliness played a role in maintaining equilibrium. You're aware as you run your hands over smooth glass bottles that washing your hands, bathing, and scrubbing your skin weren't just about comfort or appearance. They were vital to your spiritual and physical well-being. Physicians often prescribed baths to treat ailments. Hot water infused with herbs could soothe fever, open pores, and purge the body of excess humors. Conversely, cold baths were recommended for melancholy, sluggish digestion, or to invigorate the body after illness. You imagine kneeling beside a wooden tub, steam curling up as a mix of rosemary, sage, and rue is added, drawing out impurities while imparting fragrance and a sense of ritualized calm. Topical treatments were widespread. Skin problems, boils, rashes, and wounds were treated with ointments made from honey, fats, crushed herbs, and even minerals like lead or mercury, the latter more dangerous than helpful but widely believed to work. Ashes and clay were applied to abscesses to draw out infection, while fragrant oils softened skin, soothed irritation, and masked odor. You might dab honey and rosewater onto your hands before heading to market, both to heal and to signal refinement. Herbal remedies were the backbone of personal care. Lavender, chamomile, rosemary, and thyme were used in washes, poultices, and powders. Some recipes were oddly specific: mint crushed into vinegar for refreshing skin, sage boiled into water to reduce sweat, nettles infused in oil to strengthen hair. Fringe remedies abounded too: crushed pearls for complexion, powdered coral for youthful glow, and rare spices for the preservation of flesh or fragrance. You can almost taste the bittersweet aroma of these concoctions on the tongue. Doctors and barber surgeons often recommended fumigation for disease prevention. Smoke from herbs like juniper or rosemary filled rooms meant to purify the air and ward off illness. You walk past a household where a mother waves a burning bundle under the rafters. The children giggle as smoke curls through their hair. It's practical, aromatic, and strangely comforting. Tooth care, as you've learned, was part of medical attention, but other aspects of the body were treated similarly. Nails were cleaned with vinegar or lemon juice. Hair was massaged with oil to prevent lice or dryness. The skin was rubbed with scented powders to reduce odor and reflect social standing. Hygiene and medicine overlapped, forming a continuum of daily attention to the self. Even extreme methods had their place. Bloodletting, once considered both medical and hygienic, was performed to rebalance humors. Cupping, poultices, and herbal plasters were applied to various ailments. You imagine a patient lying quietly, waiting as the barber surgeon manipulates leeches or presses heated cups onto the back. a ritual as much psychological as physical. Pain and discomfort were accepted as part of the process. Relief and the smell of herbs provided reassurance. Bathhouses themselves often doubled as centers for minor medical care. A soak in hot water could ease joint pain, cleanse wounds, and prepare the body for further treatment. Surgeons might wash hands in strong vinegar before tending to patients, and herbal compresses were applied immediately afterward. Hygiene was inseparable from healing, and both were intertwined with ritual, scent, and practical knowledge. Some remedies were uniquely creative. A 14th-century manuscript describes washing hands with a mixture of ashes, honey, and rose petals to remove impurities. Another suggests rubbing feet with a paste of salt and crushed herbs to alleviate fatigue. Even facial care was medicalized. Masks of egg whites, honey, and herbal powders were applied to soothe inflammation and maintain skin tone. Fringe or folk treatments like bathing in beer or applying a poultice of oatmeal and honey were widespread, sometimes effective, sometimes merely comforting. Historians still argue how much of medieval hygiene was preventative and how much was ritualized response to illness. The lines blur. Scrubbing hands, bathing, fumigating air, perfuming clothing, and applying herbal remedies all served dual purposes, both practical and symbolic. It was an integrated system, rooted in observation, tradition, and a keen awareness of the fragility of life. By evening, you imagine the small glow of a hearth in a modest home. The air is fragrant with rosemary and sage, skin is lightly oiled, and the faint smell of vinegar hints at recent cleansing. Patients rest beside tubs and cloths while children play with small herb bundles, sniffing and learning the scents that mark safety and care. Hygiene in the Middle Ages was not perfect, but it was deliberate, thoughtful, and deeply intertwined with the rhythms of daily life. And as you leave the apothecary and step back into the streets, the combined scents of herbs, smoke, and earth remind you of a civilization that, despite limited understanding, cherished the body, the senses, and the meticulous art of care. You step outside into the crisp morning air, noticing how the changing seasons dictate every aspect of medieval hygiene. Winter brings frozen water and scarce firewood, limiting baths and washing. People layer clothes and bundle themselves, but bodies sweat anyway under woolen layers. To mask odor, herbs and scented powders are scattered inside clothing, and fireplaces fill homes with smoke that simultaneously warms and masks. Spring is a time of renewal. Herbs are harvested, water sources thaw, and bathhouses reopen after months of closure. Rivers and streams become places for laundering clothes, sometimes for bathing as well. You imagine villagers carrying bundles of linen down to the water, scrubbing and rinsing with ash or lye, and hanging garments on hedges to dry in the sun. Linen, considered a barrier against filth, is prized. Washing it carefully, often weekly, is essential to maintaining status and health. Summer is the season of scent. You walk through bustling streets filled with flowers and herbs, vendors offering sprays and sachets to mask sweat and the city's natural aromas. Perfumes, pomanders, and infused oils are at their peak use. Bathhouses are busy. Everyone seeks relief from heat and the potential for disease spread. Sweat is unavoidable, but clever application of fragrant powders, vinegar rinses, and herbal infusions creates a delicate olfactory armor. Autumn signals preparation. Herbs are harvested and dried, honey and vinegar mixed for winter remedies, water may cool and bathhouse visits decline. But people remain vigilant. Clothing is aired and powdered, rooms are fumigated with smoke and herbs, and hands are scrubbed before meals. Preventative measures become more ritualized, blending sensory pleasure with practical sanitation. Daily hygiene, though varying with the season, is intertwined with social norms. People wash hands before meals, rinse faces in cold or warm water, and comb hair to reduce lice. Body odor is masked with herbs, breath is freshened with tooth powders or aromatic seeds. Nobles rely on perfumes and elaborate grooming, while peasants use simple, effective methods. Across all classes, attention to cleanliness signals health, virtue, and social awareness. You recall the bathhouse, the barber surgeon, the apothecary, and the streets, each element part of an ecosystem of hygiene. Cleaning the body, managing odor, and applying medicinal remedies are not isolated acts. They are a rhythm, an ongoing negotiation with the environment, pests, and disease. Humans live in a sensory landscape, and medieval practices reflect keen observation of what works, both practically and psychologically. Fringe practices add color. Poultices of herbs for skin, vinegar and wine rinses for hair, fragrant powders to mask sweat, and fumigation with smoke for spiritual and physical protection. Some seem strange to us now, but they embody a holistic approach. Hygiene is part medical, part ritual, part social, and part personal satisfaction. Historians still argue whether medieval hygiene was effective in controlling disease or largely symbolic. The evidence suggests both. Clever use of herbs, water, and ventilation helped reduce illness, while ritualized practices and scented powders comforted the soul. Cleanliness was a blend of practicality, belief, and artistry. As you wander through the streets, noticing the flicker of candlelight on wooden beams and the scent of dried herbs hanging in doorways, you realize that medieval people, though constrained by technology and knowledge, were remarkably attentive to their bodies, their surroundings, and their sense of self. Their practices, bathhouses, chamber pots, tooth powders, perfumes, fumigations, are testimony to human ingenuity and persistence. And now, as twilight deepens, you let yourself relax, feeling the warmth of imagined baths, the crispness of laundered linen, the faint aroma of rosemary and sage lingering in the air. Medieval hygiene was imperfect, sometimes pungent, occasionally bizarre, but it was alive, deliberate, and deeply human. You lift a coarse wool tunic and hold it to your nose, imagining the smell of long days' wear. Clothing in the Middle Ages was both protection and challenge for hygiene. Fabrics were heavy wool, linen, sometimes layered with undergarments, trapping sweat, grime, and the sense of daily life. Bathing was intermittent, so clothes became the first line of defense against odor and germs. Linen undergarments were prized for absorbing sweat and keeping skin relatively dry. They were washed more frequently than outer layers, usually in rivers, rainwater tubs, or with lye and ash at home. You imagine dipping the fabric in cool spring water, scrubbing with your hands until the fibers gleam, then draping it over a hedge to dry in the sun, the breeze teasing away residual moisture. Perfume and herb powders were sprinkled inside clothing. Sage, rosemary, and lavender were favorites, effective, fragrant, and widely available. Nobles carried scented sachets in pockets, while peasants stuffed small cloth bags with herbs to place in boots or belts. Some even dusted themselves lightly with perfumed powders to mask the inevitable human smell that clung to fabric. Fringe practices could be elaborate. There are tales of powdered cinnamon or crushed flower petals sewn into seams, or mixtures of fragrant oils rubbed onto leather shoes. Historians still argue whether these methods were primarily functional or status displays, perhaps both. You feel the tactile memory of fabric against skin, heavy and rough, yet imbued with care and attention to comfort. Sweat management extended to daily habits. Hands and faces were washed regularly, and men and women wiped their necks and armpits with cloths moistened with vinegar or water. Even in crowded spaces, people were conscious of proximity and odor. Clothing itself was rotated, aired, or brushed, as frequent laundering of outer garments was labor-intensive. By evening, after a long day walking, working, and socializing, the subtle scent of herbs inside clothes would mingle with sweat and dust. It was a compromise between necessity and ritual, and you sense the care and thoughtfulness invested in what we now call everyday hygiene. Your toes curl against rough cobblestones, and you realize medieval footwear was more than decoration. It was a hygiene challenge. Shoes were basic leather or wooden clogs, often worn for weeks without cleaning. Feet were washed when possible, usually with cold water, herbs, or even beer. Public baths sometimes offered foot washing stations, but daily attention was limited. Odor and infection were common. People sprinkled herbs, ash, or sand inside shoes to absorb moisture. Socks, when worn, were made from linen or wool, often rotated to allow drying. Wealthy folk might soak their feet in vinegar and rosewater before slipping into freshly powdered slippers. Fringe remedies included rubbing garlic or mustard seeds on the soles, believed to stimulate circulation or ward off disease. Public spaces were treacherous. Streets were muddy, littered, and teeming with animals. You step carefully, mindful of puddles that may carry more than just water. Foot hygiene was as much about survival as comfort, avoiding infection, protecting from injury, and reducing odors that might offend neighbors. Bathhouse visits were treasured opportunities for deep cleaning, soaking, and scrubbing hard-worn feet. Historians still debate how effective these practices were against fungal infections and parasites, but people clearly understood the importance of caring for the base of the body. Rituals, fragrance, and attention made a tangible difference, even in less than ideal conditions. You imagine the hidden rituals of women's hygiene, often overlooked but deeply structured. Menstrual management relied on cloth pads, rags, or soft linen tucked into belts. These were washed carefully with water, ash, or herbal infusions, dried in the sun and reused. Comfort, discretion, and cleanliness guided the practice. Bathing during menstruation varied by region and belief. Some authorities recommended hot baths for relief, others insisted on moderation to avoid imbalance of humors. Herbs like rosemary, sage, and yarrow were used to soothe discomfort and reduce odor. Fringe remedies included scented powders or infusions worn against the skin, believed to maintain virtue and protect health. Women's hygiene also extended to childbirth. Midwives washed hands, herbs were sprinkled around birthing areas, and vinegar or rosemary water was used for cleansing. Scholars still argue the effectiveness of these practices against infection, but they demonstrate a sophisticated understanding of ritualized cleanliness. You follow villagers from spring to winter, noticing how hygiene adapts to disease risk. Cold water baths in winter, river washes in summer, herbs burned or carried year-round. Each choice responds to environment, pests, and common illnesses. Hand washing before meals, fumigation of rooms, and laundering of linen were preventive measures. Smoke from rosemary, sage, or juniper was believed to protect against plague. People wore fragrant powders, applied herbal oils, and washed daily when possible. Fringe practices included fumigating streets, sprinkling vinegar on floors, and wearing sachets of garlic or ambergris. Historians still debate the effectiveness of these methods, but medieval hygiene shows a sophisticated attempt to mediate risk. Ritual, fragrance, and observation formed a practical system rooted in daily life and sensory awareness. You pause at the edge of a village, reflecting on what hygiene meant beyond water, soap, and herbs. It was philosophy, a dialogue between body, environment, and society. Cleanliness indicated virtue, status, health, and mindfulness. People understood limits, adapted creatively, and ritualized care to suit both practicality and cultural norms. Bathhouses, chamber pots, herbal rinses, perfumed powders, and laundering practices reveal a society negotiating the realities of life. Hygiene was never perfect, yet deliberate, imaginative, and essential. Their rituals, from combing hair to fumigating rooms, embody resilience and ingenuity. And as you walk through imagined streets, smelling rosemary, sage, and warm wood, you sense a subtle truth. Medieval hygiene, strange and complex as it seems, laid the foundation for later advances. They understood instinctively that care of the body is care of the soul, and that cleanliness is intertwined with community, ritual, and survival. Their world was aromatic, inventive, and alive, and in following their steps you glimpse a human story of curiosity, adaptation, and enduring ingenuity. You step into a vast, marble-floored chamber, the scent of rosewater and burned herbs curling gently in the air. This is the domain of the medieval aristocrat, where hygiene is entwined with ritual, luxury, and spectacle. Nobles approached cleanliness not only as a necessity but as a performance, a demonstration of wealth, refinement, and status that extended far beyond mere soap and water. Bathing for the upper classes was elaborate. Large wooden tubs, sometimes lined with metal, were filled with hot water infused with herbs like rosemary, lavender, and sage. Occasionally, fragrant flowers, crushed petals, or rare spices like cloves or cinnamon were added to create an aromatic experience. Servants scurried about, fetching fresh water, pouring it carefully over the bather, and rubbing the skin with oils or herbal pastes. You can imagine the weight of silk gowns set aside, the shimmer of pearls or jewels removed, and the anticipation of sinking into scented steam. The bath itself was often a ritualized affair. Music might play, incense would rise, and attendants offered warm towels or scented cloths to dab away moisture. Some nobles enjoyed bathing in milk, wine, or even beer, believed to soften skin, improve complexion, and invigorate the senses. Fringe treatments included infusions of crushed pearls, ground coral, or rose petal pastes applied to the skin. These practices were luxurious, yes, but also reflected a desire to manipulate health, youthfulness, and vitality through available means. Haircare was equally meticulous. Combs made from ivory or fine wood were used to untangle, style, and inspect for lice. Oils, sometimes scented with rose or almond, were massaged into the scalp, and fragrant powders sprinkled through braids. Aristocratic women might wear elaborate veils afterward, the scent of herbs lingering for hours. Men, too, followed strict grooming routines, shaving or trimming, washing hands and face with scented water, and perfuming their clothing to present a controlled, cultivated image. Hands and nails received special attention. Frequent washing with herbal infusions was complemented by gentle scrubbing with soft cloths or brushes. Fingernails were kept short and clean, sometimes rubbed with oils or powders to maintain appearance. Even in a world without germ theory, aristocrats understood that visible dirt reflected poorly on social standing. Bathhouses within castles were elaborate extensions of this philosophy. Some featured heated floors, channels for hot water circulation, and adjacent rooms for resting and applying ointments afterward. The act of bathing became a ritual of relaxation, socializing, and display, blurring the line between hygiene and leisure. You wander through imagined corridors, hearing the faint trickle of water, sensing the soft thud of slippers on polished stone, and smelling the mingled aroma of herbs and waxed wood. Perfume and scent played a central role. Pomanders, scented powders, and essential oils were distributed throughout rooms, rubbed into linens, or carried in small containers. Some nobles sprinkled fragrant powders directly on themselves, not just for odor masking but as a sign of refinement. Fringe practices included inserting cloves, ambergris, or musk into garments or even rubbing them directly onto skin, exotic, expensive, and luxurious. Historians still argue whether these rituals were more about hygiene, social signaling, or psychological comfort, but the evidence is clear. Aristocratic bathing and grooming involved careful attention, elaborate preparation, and often significant expense. It was a deliberate negotiation between health, beauty, and societal expectation. Meals, music, conversation, and bathing often intertwined. A bather might converse with attendants, discuss politics, or receive visitors during lengthy routines. Baths were not purely private, they were theatrical, sensory, and deeply intertwined with aristocratic life. You sense the rhythm: water, heat, herbs, oils, powders, combs, a sequence designed to soothe, impress, and maintain control over the body and environment. Even the materials used were carefully chosen. Linen towels, soft sponges, and rare oils reflected status and refinement. Servants ensured constant replenishment of water, herbs, and heated stones for warming rooms. You feel the imagined warmth on your skin, the scent of lavender, and the delicate pressure of soft cloths. Realizing that medieval aristocratic hygiene was an immersive, multi-sensory experience. Sleep routines were connected too. After bathing, perfumed cloths were laid on beds, skin was lightly oiled, and scented sachets were placed near pillows. Fragrance, warmth, and comfort extended hygiene into the night, reflecting a holistic understanding of care that bridged body, senses, and social expectation. Aristocrats also understood timing and moderation. Baths were not daily, but strategically chosen after illness, before major events, or seasonally to align with air quality, water availability, and social custom. The combination of ritual, luxury, and practical care illustrates a philosophy where hygiene was inseparable from status, health, and aesthetic sensibility. Even fringe treatments have their charm: egg whites for smooth skin, powdered pearls for complexion, and milk baths for softness. Some might seem bizarre to us, yet they embody a medieval desire to refine, preserve, and enhance the human body within the constraints of available knowledge. Walking away from the imagined bathhouse, you breathe in lingering scents of herbs, flowers, and faintly warmed stone. You understand the artistry, patience, and attention required to maintain aristocratic hygiene. In their world, care of the body was a statement of wealth, taste, and civilization, as much as a matter of cleanliness. You watch a group of children tumbling across a village green, bare feet kicking up dust, laughter mingling with the scent of herbs drying in the sun. Hygiene for medieval children was an education in practicality, ritual, and adaptation, often learned through play, family routines, and keen observation of adults. Unlike the rigid grooming routines of nobles, children's care combined instruction, experimentation, and a surprising amount of freedom, and sometimes chaos. Bathing for children was intermittent but attentive. Infants might be swaddled and bathed in warm herbal water several times a week, often with chamomile, lavender, or rue to soothe delicate skin. You imagine a mother kneeling beside a wooden tub, murmuring gentle songs as she dips a tiny body into the scented water, wiping carefully and drying with a soft linen cloth. Older children might follow, washing hands, faces, and feet themselves under supervision. Play itself often doubled as hygiene education. Kids washed hands in streams after digging in soil, learned to comb hair after wrestling with siblings, or carried small cloths to wipe faces after meals. You can almost see a child dipping a handkerchief into a basin, imitating the routines of parents, giggling as the water splashes onto knees and skirts. These moments were as much about sensory experience, water on skin, herbs under fingers, as they were about cleanliness. Clothing routines also educated young ones. Linen undergarments were changed and washed, sometimes with ashes or lye soap, while outer layers were brushed or aired. Children learned how to handle fabrics carefully, fold garments, and sprinkle aromatic powders to manage odor. It was a practical lesson in self-care and respect for property, and a subtle introduction to social norms. Hair grooming often involved siblings or parents. Combing and braiding were part chore, part bonding. Herbs, oils, and vinegar rinses were applied, sometimes mixed with fragrant petals. Fringe methods included sprinkling crushed flowers or powdered roots for lice prevention, part medicine, part superstition. Historians still argue how effective these routines were, but they reveal the careful observation and transmission of knowledge within families. Children were not exempt from broader sanitation practices either. Learning to use chamber pots, dispose of waste properly, and wash hands before meals was integrated into daily life. Rituals were playful yet instructive: a spoonful of vinegar for sticky hands, a splash of herb-infused water for scrapes, or a game to catch the dirt on fingertips before dinner. You sense the rhythm: work, play, learning, and subtle care blending into a seamless childhood experience. Illness prevention was a subtle part of hygiene education. Kids were taught to avoid stagnant water, to cover wounds, and to help care for each other with herbal compresses or rinses. Even the smallest actions, rubbing a child's feet with rosemary-infused water or sweeping hair with a fine-toothed comb, contributed to survival. Historians still debate whether these practices were primarily about health or socialization, but it's clear that medieval children internalized hygiene as a habit, a sensory experience, and a social expectation. You can almost smell the herbs on tiny hands, feel the warm water on skin, and hear laughter blending with the soft slap of linen on stone as routines, games, and lessons intermingle. Seasonal adjustments also affected children's hygiene. In winter, hands were wiped with damp cloths, linen changed less frequently, and herbs were burned to maintain a sense of freshness indoors. Summer allowed more washing in rivers and streams, more airing of clothing, and playful dips in cool water, reinforcing lessons about care and comfort. Even in the chaos of childhood, these routines conveyed values: attention to self, observation of others, and an appreciation of ritualized care. You picture a group of children chasing each other around a village well, pausing to wash hands, comb hair, or dab fragrant powders on sweaty foreheads. There's a rhythm here: laughter, learning, hygiene, and play coexisting, teaching them lessons that would persist into adulthood. By evening, the sun lowers, casting long shadows over the village. Children wash, comb, and scent themselves lightly before heading indoors. The faint aroma of herbs lingers on skin and hair, the texture of washed linen brushes fingertips, and a sense of accomplishment settles over the little ones. Hygiene is not perfection, it is practice, rhythm, and attention learned in play and through gentle guidance. Walking past them, you sense the delicate balance: curiosity, education, and bodily care intertwined seamlessly. In medieval childhood, hygiene was as much about learning to live in the world with its dust, pests, smells, and water as it was about cleanliness itself.